I refused my parents' demand to sign over my $800,000 home as a wedding gift to my sister. My father responded by swinging a heavy brass centerpiece at my head, knocking me completely cold right in the middle of the bridal suite. What they did not know was that her perfect, wealthy fiancé had already hired me to destroy them. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives to protect your peace. My name is Maya, and I am 32 years old. Right now, I am sitting in the quiet sanctuary of my living room, completely at peace with the life I have built. But to understand how I got here, we have to go back to the exact moment my family tried to bleed me dry. 30 minutes before my sister Chloe was supposed to walk down the aisle for her $150,000 wedding, the air inside the Ritz-Carlton bridal suite was suffocating. It smelled of heavy floral arrangements, expensive hairspray, and pure unfiltered desperation. I stood near the velvet sofa, adjusting the strap of my bridesmaid dress, waiting for the photographer to return for group shots. Instead, the heavy oak door clicked shut, and the deadbolt slid into place with a loud thud. My father Marcus stood blocking the exit. He wore a custom tuxedo that barely concealed his rigid, aggressive posture. A former local bank president, he was a man who demanded absolute submission from everyone in his orbit. My mother Vivian sat on the edge of a vanity chair, smoothing out her pristine silk dress. She had spent the last year bragging to her elite Atlanta social circles, making sure every woman in her Jack and Jill chapter knew her youngest daughter was marrying into Boston old money. Harrison was incredibly wealthy white and completely oblivious to the financial rot hiding beneath our family's perfect facade. Or so they thought. Chloe stood in the center of the room in her massive designer gown. She was not glowing with bridal joy. She was pacing the floor like a caged animal biting at her perfectly manicured nails. Vivian patted the seat next to her, giving me that artificial, tight-lipped smile she usually reserved for charity galas. She slid a thick manila folder across the glass table toward me. "Maya." My mother began, her voice dripping with calculated sweetness. "We need to talk about your contribution to your sister's future." I glanced at the folder, recognizing the legal formatting immediately. I picked it up and scanned the first page. It was a property transfer deed. My property. The historic 4-bedroom house in Buckhead that I had bought as a neglected ruin and spent 3 years renovating from scratch. I had poured my blood and sweat into those hardwood floors and custom fixtures. The estate was now valued at over $800,000. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level so they would not see my rising anger. My father stepped forward and crossed his arms over his chest. "It is a transfer of deed. You are going to sign the Buckhead house over to Chloe and Harrison today. It will be presented at the reception as a joint wedding gift from the family." I looked from my father's stern face to my mother's expectant smile, then finally to Chloe, who was suddenly very interested in the hem of her elaborate dress. For a moment I thought it was a sick joke. I had known they favored Chloe since we were children. She was the golden child who followed their exact script, while I was the disappointment who dropped out of law school to start my own business. But this level of entitlement was completely insane. "You want me to give my house to Chloe?" I said, making sure I heard them correctly. "It is the only way that makes sense." Vivian sighed, adjusting her diamond earrings as if we were discussing the weather. "Harrison's family is gifting them a stunning summer home in the Hamptons. We cannot look like the poor relations, Maya. You know how important optics are in our circle. What will his parents think if the bride's family cannot provide a comparable asset to start their marriage right?" "Then you buy her a house," I replied, dropping the folder back onto the glass table with a sharp smack. "You and Dad have a massive estate in Alpharetta. Sell it, downsize, and buy her a starter home yourselves." Chloe let out a dramatic, breathy sob, her hands flying to her face carefully to avoid smudging her professional makeup. "You are so selfish, Maya. You are 32 and single. You do not even need 4 bedrooms all to yourself. Harrison and I are going to start a family, and we need a proper estate to entertain his colleagues. You know how important this is to me and to the family legacy. You have always been jealous of me because I actually finished my degree and made mom and dad proud. I stared at my younger sister. Her sense of entitlement was breathtaking. She had never worked a day in her life living off our parents' credit cards while curating a flawless aesthetic for her thousands of followers online. Meanwhile, I had spent the last decade building a crisis public relations firm from the ground up, fighting for every single dollar I earned. My parents thought my business was just a pathetic little party planning venture because I intentionally kept my wealth a secret. I knew exactly how greedy they were, and this moment proved I was right to hide my success. Your sister is making a very reasonable point, Vivian chimed in, her tone shifting from sweet to authoritative. You owe this family, Maya. We endured absolute humiliation when you quit your studies at Spelman. You dragged our good name through the mud while your father was serving on the bank board. I had to face all my friends and make excuses for your failure. We let you figure things out on your own, and now it is time to pay us back for the embarrassment you caused. By giving Chloe the Buckhead property, you will finally be doing something useful for the family name. Harrison comes from generations of wealth. We cannot have his parents looking down on us today. I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer audacity of their demand wash over me. They truly believed they could trap me in this room and bully me into signing away my life savings just to keep up appearances for a bunch of rich strangers. I looked at the glossy folder on the glass table, then up at my parents. I am not signing over my house, I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the submission they expected. Not today, not ever. My father's face darkened, the thick veins in his neck bulging against his starched white collar. He took a heavy step forward, closing the distance between us until he was towering over me. You do not have a choice in this matter, he commanded, using the same booming authoritarian voice he used to terrorize loan officers and bank tellers. We raised you. We fed you. We paid for your upbringing in the best neighborhoods in Atlanta. You are going to do your duty to this family, or I will make sure you regret it. Do not act like you are above this, Vivian hissed, dropping her charity gala smile completely. The real Vivian was cold, calculating, and ruthless. You owe us your life. When you threw away your law degree at Spelman, you made us the laughingstock of our entire social circle. Do you know how hard it was for me to show my face at the country club while my friends' daughters were passing the bar exam and securing prestigious clerkships? You decided to go play party planner, and we tolerated it. We let you live your little bohemian lifestyle. Now it is time to pay the toll. I felt a bitter laugh rising in my throat. They really believed their own distorted narrative. They believed that providing basic shelter and food for their child was a loan that accrued interest payable upon demand. They genuinely thought I owed them my $800,000 asset to compensate for their wounded pride. Pay the toll, I echoed, taking a step toward my father instead of backing away. I locked eyes with him, refusing to blink. Let us talk about tolls, Dad. Let us talk about why you are actually demanding my property right now. This is not about Chloe looking good in front of Harrison's old money relatives. This is about you needing a clean, debt-free asset to leverage. Marcus froze. A flicker of genuine panic crossed his eyes before the rage masked it again. I do not know what you are talking about, he growled, though his voice lacked its previous absolute certainty. Oh, please, I said, my voice sharp and loud enough to echo off the bridal suite's high-vaulted ceiling. You are broke. The whole Atlanta financial sector is whispering about it. You have been taking out secret loans to cover bad investments for years. You are drowning in offshore debt, and you thought you could use this wedding as a smokescreen to secure Harrison's family wealth. When that did not pan out fast enough, you decided to steal my house to use as collateral to keep the bank from seizing your own assets. Vivian gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. How dare you speak to your father that way? He is a respected businessman. He is a fraud, I shot back, pointing at the lavish decorations around the room. And this entire wedding is a fraud. You spent $150,000 on a single day. You blew $70,000 on imported white orchids alone. You booked the Ritz-Carlton, hired a 12-piece orchestra, and bought a designer gown that cost more than most people make in a year. You financed a fantasy you cannot afford, and now you want me to hand over the home I built from scratch to cover your massive, pathetic ego trip. That was the breaking point for Chloe. The bride finally snapped. She stomped her expensive heel on the plush carpet, her face contorting into an ugly, spoiled scowl that clashed horribly with her elegant bridal styling. "Shut up!" she screamed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched shriek. "Just shut up, Maya! You are ruining everything!" She grabbed a crystal champagne flute from the vanity and hurled it at the wall. It shattered into a dozen pieces, sending expensive champagne splattering across the custom wallpaper. This is my day, my perfect day. I have spent 18 months curating every single detail of this aesthetic. My wedding is going to be featured in high society magazines. Harrison's parents are out there right now mingling with senators and chief executive officers, and you are in here ruining my aesthetic with your selfish, jealous garbage. I am not ruining anything, I replied calmly, keeping my distance from the shattered glass scattered across the floor. I am just refusing to be your sacrificial lamb. I worked grueling 16-hour days to buy that property. I scraped and saved while you lived off Daddy's credit cards. I am not giving it to you so you can play pretend with a billionaire. You have always been jealous of me. Chloe wailed, tears now freely streaming down her face, ruining her meticulous airbrushed makeup. Because I did what I was supposed to do. I got the right degree, I found the right man, and I am elevating this family. You are just a sad, lonely spinster who sells cheap balloons for a living. You should be honored to give me that house. Harrison and I deserve it. We are the ones who actually matter. Vivian rushed to Chloe's side, wrapping her arms around the hysterical bride and shooting me a look of pure venom. "Look what you have done," my mother spat, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "You are destroying your sister's wedding day. You have always been a toxic, hateful girl. Sign the paper right now and get out of our sight before you do any more damage." I looked at the three of them, my father shaking with suppressed violence and financial terror, my mother desperately clinging to her crumbling social facade, and my sister throwing a toddler's tantrum in a $30,000 wedding dress. They were pathetic, toxic, and utterly dangerous. But I was no longer the frightened college student they had thrown out into the street 10 years ago. I was a self-made woman, and I was absolutely done being their punching bag. I turned on my heel, the silk fabric of my bridesmaid dress swishing around my legs. I did not look back. I did not need to. The air in the room had grown so thick with their panic and rage that I could practically feel it pressing against my skin. I took a step toward the heavy oak doors, fully intending to walk down that grand hallway, find the nearest exit, and leave this entire toxic circus behind me forever. But my father had always been a man who demanded the final word. He moved with a sudden, violent speed that betrayed the distinguished aging banker image he cultivated so carefully. Before I could reach the brass handle, Marcus threw his massive frame in front of the door. He braced his hands against the polished wood, effectively sealing me inside the bridal suite. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, the custom tuxedo straining across his shoulders like a cage. "Move out of my way," I said. My voice was dangerously low, a stark contrast to Chloe's ongoing hysterical sobs behind me. "You are not going anywhere," my father hissed, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "You are going to sit down, take a pen, and sign that property deed. You are going to save this family. I will not let you walk out of here and destroy everything I have spent my entire life building." "You destroyed it yourself," I replied, staring straight into his desperate, furious eyes. "Your bad investments destroyed it. Your greed destroyed it. I am not your financial bailout plan, Dad. I am leaving, and if you do not step aside right now, I will start screaming. I will scream so loud that Harrison's billionaire parents will hear me all the way down in the grand ballroom." I saw the exact moment something inside him snapped. It was not just anger. It was the terrifying realization of his own absolute powerlessness. For 32 years, he had controlled every narrative in our household. He had dictated who was successful and who was a failure. Now the daughter he had thrown away was the only thing standing between him and total financial ruin, and she was refusing to play her assigned role. His eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for a way to force my compliance. His gaze landed on the antique console table positioned just to the right of the door. Resting on top of the polished marble surface was a massive ornate brass centerpiece designed to hold a dozen heavy pillar candles. It was a dense, decorative block of solid metal. I saw his hand twitch, but my brain could not process the reality of what was about to happen. "You think you are so smart?" my father growled, his voice dropping into a guttural, unrecognizable register. "You think you can just turn your back on us?" I took a breath to tell him I was done talking. I never got the chance to speak the words. Marcus lunged to the side, his large hand wrapping around the thick base of the brass centerpiece. In one fluid, violent motion, he lifted the heavy metal object and swung it through the air with all his strength. There was no hesitation. There was no fatherly restraint. He swung it like a weapon aimed directly at my head. Time seemed to fracture, slowing down into a series of disjointed, terrifying frames. I saw the brass gleaming under the bright vanity lights. I saw the pure, unhinged rage contorting his face. I tried to raise my arms, tried to step back, but there was no space and no time. The impact was explosive. The heavy brass struck the side of my skull just above my left temple. A sickening, wet crack echoed through the bridal suite, drowning out the background noise of Chloe's crying. The pain did not register immediately. Instead, there was a blinding flash of white light behind my eyes, followed by a concussive shockwave that rippled through my entire body. My knees gave out instantly. The world tilted violently on its axis, the plush carpet rushing up to meet me. I hit the floor hard, my shoulder and hip taking the brunt of the secondary impact. A loud, high-pitched ringing pierced my ears, blocking out the ambient sounds of the hotel. I lay there on my side, completely paralyzed. A terrifying numbness began to spread down my neck, followed closely by a sudden searing wave of agony radiating from my temple. I blinked, trying to clear the rapidly encroaching darkness from my vision. The room spun in dizzying circles. Through my blurred sight, I could see the polished tips of my father's expensive leather dress shoes, standing just inches from my face. He had not dropped the centerpiece. He was standing over me, breathing heavily. Then the warm, thick sensation of blood began to pool rapidly against my skin, running down the side of my face and dripping onto the hotel floor. The high-pitched ringing in my ears slowly gave way to the muffled, distorted sounds of the room. I could hear someone gasping for air. "Oh my God!" Chloe shrieked, her voice sounding as though it were coming from the bottom of a deep well. "Look what you did to her dress. The blood is going to get on my shoes. She is bleeding everywhere," my mother cried out, her voice laced with panic. Not for my safety, but for the optics of the disaster unfolding in front of her. "Marcus, what have you done? Look at this mess. The blood is going to ruin the expensive hotel carpet. Management will charge us a fortune for this. Someone get a towel before it stains." I tried to speak, tried to tell them to call an ambulance, but my mouth refused to move. My brain felt completely disconnected from my body. The edges of my vision narrowed, folding in on themselves like a dying television screen. The bright vanity lights above faded into a dull, fuzzy gray. The last thing I registered before the heavy, suffocating blanket of unconsciousness pulled me under was the cold realization that my own father had just tried to kill me over a wedding gift. Then absolute darkness took over. I looked up at the police officer, projecting the absolute calm of a woman fully in control of her faculties. My head throbbed with a blinding intensity, but my mind had never been clearer. The officer was waiting for an accusation. My parents were waiting for a hysterical outburst that would prove their carefully constructed lie. I did not give them what they wanted. I tripped. I said, my voice barely above a whisper but perfectly steady. My mother is right. I tripped on the hem of my dress and hit the edge of the marble table. It was entirely my own clumsy fault. The silence in the bridal suite was absolute. The police officer lowered his pen, looking slightly disappointed that the potential crime scene had just devolved into a mundane accident. The two EMTs relaxed their tense postures, returning their focus strictly to my physical wounds. But the reaction from my family was the most telling. Vivian let out a long, shuddering breath, her shoulders dropping as the tension drained out of her body. Marcus slowly unclasped his hands, the terrifying, aggressive glare in his eyes shifting into a look of smug, victorious satisfaction. Chloe actually smiled a genuine, relieved smirk that broke through her fake bridal tears. They thought they had won. They thought the blow to the head and the threat of a psychiatric hold had finally broken my spirit. They believed I had surrendered, accepting my role as the unstable, clumsy scapegoat just to avoid their wrath. "It is okay, darling," Vivian cooed, stepping forward and kneeling beside the EMTs. She reached out and patted my arm with a sickening display of false maternal affection. "We know you did not mean to cause a scene. The wedding stress just got to be too much for you. We will get you to a hospital, and we can discuss your treatment options tomorrow when you are feeling better." The officer closed his notepad and tucked it into his uniform pocket. "All right, folks, since it is a confirmed accidental fall, there is no need for a police report. The paramedics will get her transported to the emergency room to check out that head injury. Good luck with the wedding." He tipped his hat and walked out of the bridal suite, completely unaware that he was leaving a victim in the hands of her attackers. The heavy oak door swung shut behind him, leaving me alone with my family and the two medical technicians, who were busy unpacking a roll of thick white bandaging. Marcus stepped forward, entirely dropping the concerned father act. His voice was low-laced with absolute authority and dripping with condescension. "You made the smart choice, Maya. Once the doctors patch up that cut, you are going to go straight back to your apartment. You will stay there out of sight until we contact you to finalize the property transfer. Do not make us come looking for you." I winced as the EMT began wrapping the tight gauze around my head, securing the pressure pad directly over my bleeding temple. The physical pain was excruciating, but it served as a sharp, constant reminder of exactly what these people were capable of. "Are we ready to transport the lead?" EMT asked, adjusting the straps on his medical bag. "We can bring the stretcher right up to the door. We should get a CT scan done as soon as possible to rule out any internal bleeding." "No," I said. The EMT stopped looking down at me in confusion. "Ma'am, you have a severe laceration and a moderate concussion. You need medical attention at a proper facility." I pushed myself up onto my elbows. The room tilted violently and nausea washed over me, but I forced my muscles to lock into place. "I am refusing transport," I stated clearly. "I want you to clean the wound, seal it with medical adhesive, and bandage it as flat as possible. I am not leaving this hotel." Vivian gasped, her hands flying to her hips. "Maya, stop being ridiculous. Look at yourself. You are covered in blood. You are going to the hospital right now. We are not dealing with your stubbornness today." I managed to push myself up into a seated position on the floor. I ignored my mother entirely and looked directly at the lead paramedic. "I know my rights. I am fully conscious-oriented, and I am refusing ambulance transport. You cannot force me to leave. Clean the wound and seal it. I am paying out of pocket for your on-site services." The EMTs exchanged a hesitant look, but they knew I was legally correct. They could not kidnap a conscious patient who was refusing care. Reluctantly, the lead technician opened his trauma kit and pulled out a bottle of sterile saline and a tube of surgical glue. "What do you think you are doing?" Marcus demanded, stepping toward me. "You are not staying here. You are a bloody mess. You will ruin the entire aesthetic of the reception." I winced as the cold saline washed over the deep cut on my temple, washing away the dried blood. I looked up at my father, letting a cold, dead smile spread across my face. "I am doing exactly what a supportive, loving sister should do," I replied. "I am staying to celebrate Chloe's perfect day. I am going to sit at the family table right where I belong." Chloe let out a horrified shriek. "No, no, you are not. You look like a monster. Harrison's family is going to ask questions. The photographers are going to capture that hideous bandage on your head. You cannot walk out there looking like you just survived a bar fight." "I am walking out there," I said as the EMT applied the stinging surgical glue to close the gash. "And if you try to stop me, Dad, I will walk straight up to Harrison and tell him that you attacked me because you are drowning in debt and desperate to steal my assets. I will tell him you are trying to use his family as a financial bailout. You want to play games with optics. Let us see how the old money crowd reacts to a broke, violent father-in-law." Marcus turned a sickly shade of gray. The absolute certainty in my voice paralyzed him. He knew I had nothing left to lose while he had his entire fraudulent empire balancing on the edge of a knife. The EMT finished applying a sleek flesh-colored bandage over the sealed wound. It was highly visible, a glaring mark of violence against my dark skin and elegant bridesmaid dress. It was perfect. I slowly pulled myself up from the floor, my legs shaking slightly before I found my balance. I smoothed out the wrinkles in my silk dress and picked up my clutch purse from the vanity. "Shall we go?" I asked, looking at my terrified, trapped family. "The orchestra is playing and we have a wedding to attend." I took exactly one step toward the heavy oak doors before my father's large hand clamped down on my shoulder. His grip was like a vice, fingers digging into my collarbone with enough force to bruise. Before I could cry out, he shoved me backward. My legs still trembling from the adrenaline and the concussive shock of the brass centerpiece gave out entirely. I collapsed hard back into the velvet vanity chair, my breath catching in my throat. The EMTs had just stepped out into the corridor to dispose of their biohazard materials and radio in their final refusal of transport report. The police officer who had lingered near the doorway received a static crackle on his radio and stepped out into the hall to answer a dispatch call. The heavy suite door swung shut behind them, latching us in. We were completely alone again. The false smiles instantly vanished from my parents' faces. Marcus leaned in so close I could smell the sharp metallic scent of his nervous sweat masking his expensive cologne. His eyes were completely devoid of anything resembling fatherly affection. They were the eyes of a cornered predator. "You really think you are going to walk out there and parade that bandage around my guests?" he whispered, his voice a low, gravelly threat that vibrated in my chest. "You think you hold the cards because you survived a little bump on the head? You have no idea what I can do to you, Maya. You already tried to kill me," I replied, my voice steady despite the searing pain throbbing in my temple. "What else is left? Are you going to finish the job right here in front of Chloe?" "Do not be dramatic," Vivian sneered, stepping up beside my father. She picked up the manila folder containing the property transfer deed. A smear of my blood had stained the bottom corner of the heavy cardstock. She wiped it off with a tissue, looking more disgusted by the bodily fluid than by the violence that had caused it. "Your father was simply bringing you back to reality. And now you are going to listen very carefully." Marcus placed both hands on the arms of my velvet chair, trapping me in place. He lowered his face until we were eye to eye. "I know exactly what you do for a living, Maya. You think you hid your little crisis PR firm from us, but Atlanta is a small town for men with my connections. I know you represent politicians, hotel chains, and corporate executives. Your entire business model relies on your clients trusting your judgment, your discretion, and your absolute mental stability." I kept my face perfectly neutral, but my heart skipped a beat. He had been digging. While pretending to ignore my existence for a decade, my father had been quietly tracking my rise to power. "It would be a tragedy," Marcus continued, a sick, victorious smirk playing on his lips, "if the press suddenly received a leaked medical dossier from your time at Spelman. A highly detailed, extensively documented psychiatric evaluation proving that you suffered from severe violent delusions. Documents proving that you were expelled, not because of academic failure, but because you were a clinical narcissist prone to pathological lying and self-harm." "You cannot do that," I said, narrowing my eyes. "Those records do not exist. I dropped out because I refused to let you control my career path. I have never had a psychiatric hold." "They exist if I pay the right people to say they exist," Marcus countered smoothly. "I spent 30 years running one of the most powerful banks in this state. I have funded the private practices of half the psychiatrists in Buckhead. It would take me exactly one phone call to have a backdated, perfectly forged medical history leaked to every major news outlet in Georgia. The headline will write itself. Crisis PR mogul, secretly battling severe delusions. Who will hire you then, Maya? When your own father sorrowfully confirms to the press that you have a history of making up wild, violent stories for attention." The sheer malice of his plan was breathtaking. He was not just threatening to ruin my business. He was threatening to gaslight the entire world into believing I was insane. It was the ultimate narcissistic abuse. He wanted to ensure that even if I told the truth about him assaulting me with the brass centerpiece, the public and the police would immediately dismiss it as the fabricated ramblings of a disturbed woman. You would destroy your own daughter's life just to save your social standing, I asked, staring at the man who shared my DNA. Vivian stepped closer aggressively, shoving the bloody manila folder straight into my lap. The heavy paper slapped against my thighs. "We are protecting this family," she snapped. "You chose to walk away from us. You chose to be difficult. You are 32 years old, Maya. You have no husband. You have no children. Your entire identity is wrapped up in that business of yours. If you want to keep it, you will pick up a pen right now and sign this deed." Chloe, who had been watching this exchange with rapt attention, finally stepped forward. The fake tears were completely gone. She adjusted the bodice of her $150,000 gown and looked down at me with pure, unadulterated contempt. "Just sign it, Maya," she demanded, her voice dripping with entitlement. "Harrison and I are going to gut that hideous house anyway. The interior design you chose is incredibly tacky. We are going to bulldoze the entire property and build a modern estate. But we need the land, so stop being a selfish hag and sign the paper. If you do not, Dad is going to ruin you, and I will personally make sure you never show your face in this city again." The three of them stood over me in a tight semicircle, a united front of greed, vanity, and profound toxicity. They were expecting me to break. They were waiting for the familiar crumble of the scapegoat child who had finally been pushed past her breaking point. I looked down at the property transfer deed resting on my lap. The blank signature line mocked me. To them, this piece of paper represented salvation. To me, it represented everything I had fought to escape. I had spent 10 years clawing my way up from the damp, moldy basement apartment they had banished me to. I had built a multi-million-dollar empire on my own intellect and sheer willpower, and they thought they could just take it by threatening my reputation. My head throbbed violently, a sharp stabbing pain radiating from the glued laceration on my temple. The physical trauma was intense, but it only served to sharpen my focus. As a crisis manager, I handled extortion and blackmail for a living. I neutralized corporate threats before breakfast. My father thought he was playing chess, but he was playing checkers against a grandmaster. If I signed this, I started keeping my voice small, deliberately feigning defeat. "You promise you will not release those fake medical records to the press." "I promise I will keep your shameful little secret buried," Marcus said, his chest puffing out with victorious pride. "Just like a good father should. Now sign the document. Then you can go to the hospital and get your head properly checked. But you are not leaving this room until my name is on that deed." Vivian unclasped her expensive designer purse and pulled out a sleek, gold-plated pen. She thrust it toward me, her eyes shining with greedy anticipation. "Do it quickly, Maya. The string quartet has already started playing the prelude. We have guests waiting." I slowly reached out and took the gold pen from her manicured fingers. The metal felt heavy and cold against my skin. I lowered the tip of the pen toward the signature line on the deed. I let it hover there for a long, excruciating moment. I could hear my father's heavy breathing. I could hear the rustle of Chloe's wedding dress as she shifted her weight in eager anticipation. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they had completely forgotten the cardinal rule of dealing with a crisis PR expert. Never hand them a weapon and expect them to surrender. I did not sign my name. Instead, I gripped the pen tightly and dragged the nib across the page in a massive, jagged line, tearing straight through the paper and defacing the legal document entirely. "No!" Chloe shrieked, lunging forward. "What are you doing?" Marcus roared, reaching down to grab my wrist. I swatted his hand away with a violent burst of energy, standing up from the vanity chair so fast the velvet seat tipped over backward. "You think you can blackmail me?" I said, my voice rising in volume and power. "You think you can forge medical documents and destroy my firm? Go ahead, Dad. Call your contacts at the news stations. Leak your fabricated stories. Do you know why I am not afraid of you?" I leaned in close, ensuring he could see the absolute lack of fear in my eyes. "Because my PR firm represents the very media conglomerates you are planning to call. I control the news cycle in this city. If you try to release fake psychiatric records about me, my legal team will have you indicted for defamation, extortion, and medical fraud before the ink is even dry. And as for your little threat to destroy my business, I tossed the gold pen onto the floor. You are in no position to destroy anyone. You are $2 million in debt to offshore creditors. You have leveraged your own home, and you secretly forged Harrison's signature on a line of credit to keep the bank off your back. I know everything, Marcus. I know exactly how desperate you are. My father's jaw dropped. The blood drained from his face so rapidly he looked like a corpse. Vivian staggered backward, clutching the edge of the vanity table to keep from collapsing. How do you know about that? Marcus stammered, his authoritarian facade shattering into a million pieces. Because I am the one Harrison hired to audit you, I whispered, delivering the killing blow. The silence that followed was deafening. I stepped around my paralyzed father, ignoring the horrified gasps of my mother and sister. I smoothed the skirt of my bridesmaid dress, adjusted the bandage on my temple, and placed my hand on the heavy brass door handle. Now, if you will excuse me, I said without looking back, I have a wedding to attend. I pulled the door open and stepped out into the grand, brightly lit corridor of the Ritz-Carlton, leaving my family trapped in the suffocating ruins of their own making. The heavy oak door had barely clicked shut behind me when it was violently yanked open again. My father scrambled out into the grand corridor of the Ritz-Carlton, his large frame stumbling as he tried to catch up to my steady pace. My mother followed right on his heels. She was clutching the defaced property transfer deed to her chest, as if it were a wounded child. The suffocating toxic air of the bridal suite spilled out into the pristine hotel hallway, but out here in the bright and unforgiving light of the public corridor, their absolute power over me completely evaporated. "Maya, stop right there!" Marcus hissed, keeping his voice low to avoid echoing down the long, luxurious hallway. He lunged forward and grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my skin. He tried to physically pivot my body toward the heavy silver doors of the service elevator located at the far end of the hall. The service elevator was the back door, the hidden exit designated for catering staff, housekeeping, and apparently daughters who refused to be extorted. "You are leaving right now," my father commanded, his breath hot and erratic. "You are going to take the service elevator down to the loading dock. I will have the valet bring your car around to the back alley. You are going to go home, and you are going to keep your mouth shut until I figure out how to clean up this disaster." I stopped walking. I planted my feet firmly into the thick floral-patterned carpet and refused to move a single inch. I turned my head slowly, staring down at the hand he had wrapped around my arm. I did not say a word. I simply looked at his gripping fingers with such absolute icy disdain that he instinctively recoiled, dropping his hand as if my skin had burned him. "You do not give me orders anymore," I said, my voice echoing clearly against the crystal sconces lining the corridor walls, "and I am certainly not sneaking out of the back door like a criminal." Before Marcus could formulate another threat, a distinct crackle of a police radio broke the tension. Just 20 yards away near the grand staircase, the two emergency medical technicians and the police officer were packing up their trauma bags. They had lingered in the hallway to finalize their incident reports. Hearing my father's aggressive tone, the police officer turned around, his hand resting casually near his utility belt. The lead paramedic, noticing that the sudden physical altercation had caused a fresh drop of blood to seep from the edge of my bandage, immediately stepped forward. "Ma'am," the paramedic asked, his brow furrowed in professional concern. "Is everything all right here? Do we need to reevaluate that laceration?" My mother rushed forward, inserting herself between me and the medical team. She plastered on her most convincing high society smile. "Everything is perfectly fine, officer," she chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "The wedding emotions are just running a bit high. Our daughter is just heading home to rest. She is taking the back exit to avoid the paparazzi and the guests." I stepped around my mother, completely ignoring her frantic, pleading eyes. I walked directly up to the lead paramedic. He held a digital tablet in his hands, likely the final patient care report he was preparing to submit. I need you to amend my official medical record, I stated, my voice calm, authoritative, and loud enough for the police officer to hear every single syllable. The paramedic looked surprised, but tapped the screen of his tablet to awaken it. What needs to be amended, ma'am? We noted it as an accidental fall resulting in a laceration to the left temple. Delete the word accidental, I instructed, maintaining absolute eye contact with the medical professional, and delete the word fall. I need the official mechanism of injury to accurately reflect the physical evidence. Please note that the wound was caused by blunt force trauma from above. Note that the impact angle is vertical and entirely consistent with being struck by a heavy solid brass object. The silence that descended upon the hallway was absolute. The paramedic's fingers froze over his digital keyboard. The police officer immediately stepped away from the staircase and walked briskly toward us, his demeanor shifting from casual observation to active law enforcement. Ma'am, the officer said, his voice dropping into a serious investigative register. Are you stating that you were assaulted? Are you alleging that someone in that bridal suite struck you? Behind me, I could hear my father let out a strangled, panicked gasp. Marcus was a man who cared about exactly two things in this world: his money and his reputation. The prospect of being arrested for aggravated assault in the middle of a luxury hotel surrounded by Atlanta's wealthiest citizens was his ultimate nightmare. Vivian let out a small, terrified whimper. Officer, she is confused, Marcus stammered, stepping forward with his hands raised in a placating gesture. The concussion is making her hysterical. She tripped on her dress. We all saw it. She is just upset because of some family disagreements. I did not even turn around to look at him. I kept my focus locked on the police officer. I am not hysterical and I am not confused, I said with absolute precision. I am a crisis public relations executive and I know exactly how legal documentation works. I am not pressing formal charges at this exact moment, officer. However, I require my medical records to be completely factually accurate for future legal proceedings. Blunt force trauma from above. I want it filed and time-stamped right now. The officer studied my face. He saw no hysteria, no confusion, and no fear. He saw a woman who was methodically building an ironclad legal trap. He nodded slowly and turned to the paramedic. Update the report exactly as she stated. The paramedic quickly typed the clinical terms into his tablet, capturing the grim reality of what had happened inside that room. The paper trail was now established. If Marcus ever tried to deny the assault, or if he ever attempted to leak forged psychiatric documents to the press, as he had threatened, I now had an official time-stamped police and medical report proving he was a violent, abusive liar. I would like a printed copy of that report sent to my legal team by Monday morning, I added, providing the paramedic with my business card. The officer handed me his own card, telling me to call him directly the moment I decided to pursue the assault charges. I thanked them both for their professionalism. As the medical team and the officer finally packed up and walked toward the elevators, I turned back to face my parents. They looked utterly destroyed. The power dynamic had completely inverted. They were no longer the domineering parents disciplining a rebellious child. They were two desperate, broke, terrified criminals staring at the woman who held their entire future in the palm of her hand. Maya. Please, Vivian begged, her voice cracking. Her perfect posture had collapsed, and she looked small and fragile in her expensive silk dress. You have made your point. You won. Now please just go out the back door. Go home. If Harrison's parents see you like this, if they hear any of this, the wedding will be ruined. Our family will be ruined. I looked at her pleading face and felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no familial obligation, and no hesitation. I walked over to a polished silver service cart that a catering waiter had left parked against the wall. A stack of pristine white linen napkins rested on the bottom shelf. I picked one up and walked over to a gilded ornate mirror hanging between the crystal sconces. I looked at my reflection. The flesh-colored bandage on my temple was stark and visible. A single fresh drop of blood had escaped the edge of the medical glue, trailing a thin red line down my cheekbone. I raised the white linen napkin and calmly wiped the blood away from my jawline, smoothing out my skin. I adjusted the neckline of my bridesmaid dress, ensuring the dark silk draped perfectly over my frame. I stood tall, squaring my shoulders and lifting my chin. "I am not leaving through the back door," I said to their reflections in the mirror. "I am not hiding in the shadows to protect the reputation of a man who just tried to split my head open." I turned around to face them directly. I dropped the blood-stained linen napkin onto the floor right at my father's expensive leather shoes. "I am going to walk right through those double doors into the grand ballroom," I stated, my voice echoing with cold, unyielding finality. "I am going to take my assigned seat at the head family table. I am going to smile, I am going to drink champagne, and I am going to join the reception. You better wipe the sweat off your face, Dad. It is time to celebrate." I turned my back on their horrified faces and began my long, deliberate march down the corridor toward the sound of the string quartet, ready to watch their entire fraudulent empire burn to the ground. The heavy double mahogany doors leading into the Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom stood before me like the gates to a battlefield. I did not pause to gather my courage or fix my posture. I simply pushed them open and stepped into the dazzling, overwhelming light. The immediate sensory shift was staggering. The sterile quiet of the hotel corridor vanished instantly, replaced by the lush, symphonic swell of a live 12-piece orchestra playing a sweeping classical arrangement. Thousands of crystals on the massive overhead chandeliers caught the warm, ambient lighting, casting a golden, ethereal glow over the room. The air was thick with the scent of those $70,000 imported white orchids cascading from every table, intertwined with the expensive perfumes of Atlanta's most elite society members. I kept my chin perfectly level and began my descent down the main aisle. The ballroom was packed with 150 highly curated guests. On one side of the aisle sat my mother's meticulously assembled circle. The prominent local politicians, the bank board members, and the impeccably dressed women of her high society clubs. On the other side sat Harrison's family. They were the epitome of Boston old money, dressed in understated, tailored elegance that quietly screamed generational wealth. They sat with impeccable posture, observing the southern extravagance around them with polite, guarded curiosity. My entrance did not stop the orchestra, but it absolutely stopped the conversation. It started near the back of the room, a subtle collective intake of breath from the guests closest to the doors. Then the reaction moved through the crowd like a shockwave. Heads turned, eyes widened. The clinking of fine crystal and the low hum of sophisticated chatter completely died out, replaced by a sudden, undeniable eruption of whispers. I knew exactly what they were staring at. I was wearing a custom dark silk bridesmaid gown, designed to project flawless elegance, but resting starkly against the deep brown skin of my left temple was a clinical flesh-colored medical bandage. It was impossible to miss. It threw the entire curated aesthetic of the wedding into sharp, jarring relief. I did not try to hide it behind my hair. I did not look down at the floor. I met the stunned gazes of the guests with absolute terrifying calm as I glided past their tables. A few feet behind me, the grand doors swung open again. Marcus and Vivian rushed into the ballroom, scrambling to catch up. I did not need to turn around to know exactly how much they were panicking. I could hear the frantic, uneven cadence of my father's heavy leather shoes and the sharp, desperate clicking of my mother's designer heels. They were trapped in a psychological nightmare of their own design. They could not yell at me. They could not grab my arm or physically force me out of the room. They were surrounded by the exact audience they had bankrupted themselves to impress. All they could do was put on a masterclass in deception. I caught a glimpse of them in the reflection of a massive decorative mirror along the wall. My father was sweating profusely, his face fixed into a rigid, terrifying grimace that he was desperately trying to pass off as a proud smile. He waved stiffly to a bank executive he had recently borrowed money from. My mother was faring slightly better, though her eyes were wide with sheer terror. She practically glided through the crowd, nodding and beaming at her socialite friends, projecting the image of a radiant mother of the bride, while her hands trembled visibly at her sides. I reached the front of the ballroom, ascending the two shallow steps to the elevated VIP platform where the head family table was positioned. The table was draped in heavy white silk and adorned with towering floral centerpieces. I found my assigned seat card, elegantly inscribed with gold calligraphy, right next to the empty chairs reserved for the bride and groom. I pulled out my chair and sat down with deliberate grace. A waiter in a crisp white jacket approached immediately, carrying a silver tray lined with crystal flutes of vintage champagne. I reached out my hand perfectly steady and took a glass. The cold crystal felt grounding against my skin. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the crisp taste as I looked out over the sea of confused, whispering guests. Vivian materialized at my side a second later. She did not sit down. Instead, she leaned over me, resting her hands on the back of my chair. To the rest of the room, it looked like an intimate, loving exchange between a mother and her daughter. To me, she sounded like a cornered rattlesnake. "What do you think you are doing?" she hissed, her voice vibrating with suppressed hysteria, just inches from my ear. "You are making a spectacle of yourself. Look at them. Harrison's mother is staring right at you. You are humiliating us in front of the entire Boston contingent." I took another sip of my champagne, keeping my eyes fixed on the orchestra across the room. "I am sitting at my assigned seat, Mom. I am enjoying the champagne you can no longer afford. I would say I am being the perfect bridesmaid." "Get up!" Vivian demanded, her manicured nails digging painfully into the upholstery of my chair. Her breath was coming in short, erratic bursts. "Get up right now and walk out the side door before Chloe and Harrison make their grand entrance. If Harrison sees you sitting here with a bandage on your head, he is going to ask questions. His parents will ask questions. I am not going to let you ruin this family to satisfy your petty need for revenge." I turned my head slightly, just enough to look my mother in the eye. Her pupils were dilated with pure, unadulterated fear. The thick layers of her expensive makeup could not hide the desperate, suffocating panic radiating from her pores. "You are the one who ruined this family," I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "You and Dad chose a brass centerpiece over your own daughter. You chose optics over my life. Now you are going to sit down, smile for the cameras, and watch the consequences play out." Vivian leaned in closer, her expensive perfume mingling with the metallic scent of my sealed wound. "I am warning you, Maya. If you do not leave this table immediately, I will signal security. I will have you physically dragged out of this ballroom for being drunk and disorderly. We will tell everyone your mental health finally collapsed and you had to be removed for your own safety. I will not let you take us down." I slowly placed my champagne flute back onto the table. I leaned back in my chair and let a cold, predatory smile spread across my face. "Do it," I whispered, challenging her directly. "Call security. Make a scene. Let us see what happens when your hired guards try to lay a hand on me in front of 150 witnesses." Vivian stared at me, realizing with absolute horror that I was not bluffing. The power dynamic had completely inverted, and she was powerless to stop the impending avalanche. She stood up straight, her face a mask of pure desperation, and desperately scanned the perimeter of the room. Her eyes locked onto the head of hotel security standing near the main entrance, and she raised her hand to signal him over. Marcus caught the direction of my mother's frantic gaze. He stepped up right behind her, his broad shoulders blocking the view of the nearest guest table. He gave the head of security a sharp, authoritative nod, followed by a subtle flick of his wrist toward the service exit. It was the universal gesture of wealthy men demanding a problem be disposed of quietly. The head of security, a towering man with a coiled earpiece and a tailored dark suit, caught the signal immediately. He tapped his wrist microphone, and within seconds, two equally imposing guards detached themselves from the perimeter walls. They began navigating through the sea of silk dresses and tailored tuxedos, moving with that distinct predatory grace of men paid to make messes disappear without disrupting the champagne service. Marcus leaned down, bracing his heavy hands on the table on either side of my plate. The smug, victorious arrogance had returned to his face, entirely replacing the sheer terror from just moments ago. He thought he had outmaneuvered me. "You really thought you could just sit here and hold us hostage?" My father whispered, his voice dripping with venom. "This is my event, Maya. I paid for this room. I know these security guards. You are going to be escorted through the kitchen corridors, shoved into the back of a taxi, and banished right back to whatever hole you crawled out of. And if you make a single sound while they drag you away, I will press trespassing charges myself. I did not flinch. I did not look at the three large men converging on our table. Instead, I calmly reached into my designer clutch and pulled out my smartphone. Go ahead, Marcus scoffed, letting out a harsh, breathless laugh. Call the police. Tell them your father is having you removed from his private invite-only reception because you are acting erratically. See who they believe. A prominent Atlanta banker or a hysterical woman with a bandage on her head. I unlocked my screen and bypassed the keypad entirely. I did not dial emergency services. I tapped a single contact saved on my priority speed dial list. I lifted the phone to my ear, keeping my eyes locked dead onto my father's sneering face. The line rang exactly one time before it was picked up. Jonathan, I said, pitching my voice to be perfectly audible over the swelling music of the string quartet. I am currently sitting at the head table in the grand ballroom of your Buckhead property. I need you on the floor right now. I am experiencing a slight issue with your security personnel. Marcus let out a derisive snort. He genuinely believed I was faking a phone call. He stood up straight, adjusting his tuxedo jacket as the head of security finally reached our table. Sir, the head of security murmured, addressing my father with practiced deference. Is there a problem we need to handle? Yes, Sterling, my father replied smoothly, slipping effortlessly back into his role as the distinguished patriarch. My daughter is experiencing a severe medical and psychological episode. She is heavily medicated for a head injury and is becoming disruptive. I need you to escort her out through the service corridors immediately. Do whatever is necessary to keep her quiet. Sterling nodded sharply and turned his massive frame toward me. He reached out a large, calloused hand, fully intending to grip my arm and physically haul me out of my chair. Ma'am, I am going to need you to stand up and come with us quietly. Let us not make a scene in front of your family's guests. I held up my index finger, stopping his hand dead in its tracks just inches from my shoulder. I strongly suggest you wait exactly 10 seconds before you make a decision that will cost you your pension. Sterling, I stated, reading his name tag with icy precision. Sterling paused, his brow furrowing in confusion. Security guards at luxury hotels are trained to read body language, and my posture did not match the profile of a hysterical medicated woman. I was sitting perfectly still, radiating absolute authority. Do not listen to her, Vivian hissed, stepping forward and waving her hands frantically. Grab her! Get her out of here right now! Sterling opened his mouth to speak, but the heavy oak doors at the main entrance of the ballroom suddenly burst open. Jonathan, the general manager of the Ritz-Carlton, practically sprinted down the main aisle. His usually pristine designer suit jacket was unbuttoned, and he was completely ignoring the confused stares of the elite guests. His eyes darted frantically across the room until they locked onto the VIP platform. When he saw the 3 security guards surrounding my chair, the blood drained entirely from his face. He rushed up the 2 shallow steps to the platform, gasping for breath, and physically shoved Sterling out of the way. Stand down, Jonathan ordered, his voice cracking with sheer panic. Stand down right this second. Step away from her. Sterling and the 2 other guards stumbled backward, utterly bewildered by their boss's frantic reaction. Marcus stepped forward, puffing out his chest to regain control of the situation. Jonathan, there is no need to panic, my father said smoothly, offering a charming diplomatic smile. We were just having security handle a private family matter. My daughter needs to be removed. Jonathan did not even look at my father. He ignored Marcus completely, turning his full attention to me. He bowed his head slightly, his hands trembling at his sides. Ms. Maya, I am so profoundly sorry, the general manager stammered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. I was in my office reviewing the quarterly reports. I had absolutely no idea you were attending a private event on the property tonight. If I had known, I would have personally handled your arrival. My mother's jaw dropped. She looked from Jonathan to me, her eyes wide with shock. Jonathan, what are you doing? Vivian demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. Why are you apologizing to her? She is a party planner. Tell your men to throw her out. Jonathan finally turned to look at my parents, and the expression on his face was a mixture of absolute horror and pity. Mrs. Vivian Jonathan said, his tone dropping into a dead serious, unyielding register. You clearly have no idea who your daughter is. She is not a party planner. Her crisis public relations firm holds the exclusive global contract for this entire hotel conglomerate. She handles the corporate reputation for over 400 luxury properties worldwide. She is the single most powerful corporate partner this hotel has ever contracted. She practically owns the media narrative for our entire board of directors. A collective gasp rippled from the nearby tables. The guests sitting close enough to eavesdrop had heard every single word. Marcus staggered backward as if he had been physically struck. All the color washed out of his face, leaving behind a sickly grayish pallor. He looked at me, his eyes darting frantically, as the horrifying reality of my hidden empire finally crashed down upon him. He had spent 10 years mocking me, diminishing me, and treating me like a failure, completely unaware that I possessed enough corporate power to buy and sell his entire existence 10 times over. You are instructing my own security team to physically remove my most important executive partner. Jonathan continued, his voice rising in anger. If a single one of my men lays a hand on her, she could terminate our global contract by morning, and I would be fired before lunch. Sterling, the head of security, looked like he was about to be sick. He immediately took 3 large steps back, putting significant distance between himself and my chair. The other 2 guards mirrored his movement, lowering their heads in deep apologetic submission. I am so sorry, ma'am, Sterling muttered, his voice shaking. We were given false information by the host. We had no idea who you were. I know you did not, Sterling, I replied, my voice calm and magnanimous. I am not angry with you. You were simply following orders from a man who is desperately trying to hide his own crimes. But now that we have established the actual chain of command in this building, I have a new directive for your team. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, letting the silence stretch out to maximize the humiliation of the 2 people standing before me. You are going to take your men and you are going to flank my chair for the remainder of this reception, I instructed, placing the crystal flute back onto the white silk tablecloth. You will stand directly behind me. If this man or this woman, I said, pointing directly at Marcus and Vivian, attempts to approach me, speak to me, or force me out of my seat, you will physically restrain them. Do I make myself perfectly clear? Crystal clear, ma'am, Sterling responded immediately. He snapped his fingers, and the 2 guards instantly moved into position. They bypassed my parents entirely and took up a defensive, impenetrable stance directly behind my chair. They folded their arms behind their backs, transforming into a human wall of protection. Jonathan bowed his head one last time. Please enjoy the champagne, Ms. Maya. I will be in my office if you need absolutely anything else. The general manager backed away and practically sprinted out of the ballroom, leaving the scent of pure panic in his wake. I looked up at Marcus and Vivian. They were completely paralyzed. They were entirely boxed out, flanked by the very security team they had just tried to use as a weapon against me. The power shift was absolute, public, and devastatingly humiliating. Every single high society guest in their immediate vicinity was now staring at them, their whispers growing louder and more frantic. The perfect, curated illusion of their flawless family dynamic was shattering in real time, right in front of Atlanta's most elite gossips. You can go back to your seats now, I said, gesturing casually toward their empty chairs at the other end of the VIP table. The reception is about to begin, and you really do not want to miss the toasts. I hear the groom has prepared a fascinating speech. My parents did not utter another word. Stripped of their false authority and completely boxed in by the very security team they had tried to weaponize against me, they had no moves left to play. Marcus turned around, his shoulders slumped and his heavy frame seeming to age 10 years in a matter of seconds. He rigidly offered his arm to Vivian. My mother took it with a trembling hand, her face a mask of pale, hollow defeat. Together they began the agonizingly long, humiliating walk back to their seats at the far end of the VIP platform. They had to force stiff, unconvincing smiles as they passed the tables of their wealthy friends, desperately trying to pretend nothing was wrong. But the damage was already done. The whispers in the ballroom had grown into a steady, undeniable hum. I sat back in my chair and smoothed the silk fabric of my bridesmaid gown, enjoying the sudden, pristine quiet of my heavily guarded space. But the peace only lasted for a few moments. From the grand entrance of the ballroom, I saw a massive wave of white tulle and French lace aggressively pushing through the crowd. It was Chloe. My sister was marching toward the head table with the frantic, unhinged energy of a woman watching her entire life's work go up in flames. She was trying desperately to maintain the delicate, blushing bride persona for the wedding photographer who was actively snapping photos near the towering ice sculpture. She forced a wide, blinding smile for the cameras nodding gracefully to the guests as she passed their tables. But the moment the photographer turned his lens away, her smile instantly vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated venom. She reached the VIP platform and practically threw herself up the two shallow steps. Sterling and the other two security guards immediately stepped forward, their massive frames forming a solid barricade between Chloe and my chair. "Stand down," I instructed the guards, waving my hand dismissively. "She is the bride. Let her speak." The guards seamlessly parted, allowing my sister to approach the table. Chloe slammed her manicured hands onto the white silk tablecloth. She leaned in so close that the delicate, expensive veil pinned to her hair brushed against the crystal centerpieces. She could not scream, not with Harrison's ultra-wealthy Boston family sitting just 20 yards away, so she resorted to a vicious, breathless hiss. "What is wrong with you?" Chloe spat, her eyes wide with terror and rage. "Harrison's mother has been staring at this table for the past 5 minutes. His aunts are whispering. The entire Boston contingent is watching you sit here with a literal security detail and a bandage on your head. You look like a mental patient, Maya. You are ruining the most important day of my life." I took a slow, agonizingly deliberate sip of my champagne. I let my eyes wander over her flushed, panicked face. "You ruined your own day the second you demanded I hand over my $800,000 house to fund your fake lifestyle," I replied, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. "You and Dad made a bet that I would just roll over and take the abuse like I did when I was 22. You lost the bet, Chloe. Now you have to pay the tab." Chloe scoffed, a wet, ugly sound that caught in the back of her throat. "This is not about the house. This is about you being a bitter, jealous failure. You have always been jealous of me, Maya. Even when we were kids, you could not stand the fact that Mom and Dad loved me more. You could not stand that I was prettier, thinner, and more charming. And now you are 32 years old, sitting here completely alone while I am marrying into a billionaire family." She leaned in closer, attempting to assert a dominance she absolutely did not possess. "You think your little business makes you special?" she whispered maliciously. "You think having some money makes you better than us. But look at you. You are aggressive, masculine, and completely unlovable. Harrison chose a beautiful, elegant woman to build a legacy with. His family loves me. I am going to spend my summers in the Hamptons and my winters in Aspen, surrounded by people who actually matter. You are just trying to destroy my fairy tale because you know you will never ever have one of your own." I let her finish her frantic, hateful monologue. I did not interrupt. I did not defend myself against her pathetic insults. I simply sat there and let her expose the deep, rotting core of her own insecurities. She was projecting every single one of her worst fears directly onto me. When she finally ran out of breath, I set my crystal flute down on the table. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the white silk, mirroring her posture, but dominating the space with absolute chilling composure. "You talk a lot about elegance and legacy for a woman who is currently wearing a rented floor sample," I said quietly. Chloe froze. The angry, flushed color drained out of her cheeks so fast, it was as if someone had pulled a plug. Her mouth fell slightly open, but no sound came out. I let my eyes slowly travel up and down the intricate French lace and the shimmering Swarovski crystals adorning her massive gown. It was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, but it was entirely stolen valor. "You told Harrison's mother that this was a custom bespoke creation by a private designer in Milan." I continued, keeping my voice low and conversational, ensuring only she could hear the devastating truth. "You told the entire bridal party that it took 6 months to hand-stitch those crystals. But that is a lie, isn't it, Chloe? She swallowed hard. I could see the rapid, terrified pulse beating against the delicate skin of her throat. "I do not know what you are talking about," she stammered, her voice suddenly trembling. "It is a Vera Wang floor sample from Le Rêve Bridal Boutique in Midtown," I stated with surgical precision. My crisis management team handled a massive data breach for the boutique's parent company last year. I know the owner personally. She called me yesterday afternoon in an absolute panic because the final rental deposit for this exact dress bounced. Dad's black card declined. "You did not buy a custom couture gown, Chloe. You leased a used dress under a fake limited liability company to keep up appearances because your family is completely broke." Tears immediately welled up in Chloe's eyes. The illusion she had spent 18 months meticulously crafting was being dismantled piece by piece in front of her. "You are wearing a dress that has been tried on by 50 other women," I whispered, twisting the knife just a little deeper. "And the only reason the boutique owner did not send the police to this hotel to repossess it an hour ago is because I personally paid the remaining balance. I own the debt on the dress you are standing in. Technically, you are wearing my property." "Please," Chloe begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whimper. The aggressive, bullying bride from 30 seconds ago had completely vanished. "Please, Maya. If Harrison's mother finds out I am wearing a rental, she will cancel the wedding. They are old money. They care about provenance and status. If they know we are broke, they will force Harrison to sign an annulment before the ink on the marriage license is even dry." "Harrison's family already knows you are a fraud," I replied, offering her a cold, empty smile. "Old money families do not become billionaires by being stupid. They can smell a desperate social climber from a mile away. They are just too polite to say it to your face. They are letting you play dress-up today, but tomorrow when the reality sets in, they are going to lock you out of their trust funds so fast your head will spin." Chloe staggered backward, clutching the heavy silk fabric of her rented skirt as if it were suddenly burning her skin. She looked at me with a mixture of profound terror and absolute realization. She finally understood that she had brought a knife to a gunfight, and she had already lost. But I was not finished. The dress was just the appetizer. The real destruction was still to come, and the man she was about to marry was the one holding the match. Marcus moved toward the stage like a man walking through waist-deep water. Every step appeared heavy-labored and utterly agonizing. I watched him from my seat at the VIP table, flanked by my personal wall of hotel security, taking a slow sip of my vintage champagne. The entire ballroom of 300 elite guests watched him with rapt attention, completely unaware that the distinguished wealthy patriarch they were applauding was actually a cornered criminal marching toward his own execution. He climbed the 2 small stairs to the elevated stage. The bright spotlight hit his face, highlighting the sheer sheen of cold sweat covering his forehead. He gripped the sides of the acrylic podium with both hands. His knuckles instantly turned a stark bone white. He was gripping the plastic edges so hard I genuinely thought they might snap under the pressure. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, took a deep, ragged breath, and forced his facial muscles into the most sickeningly charismatic smile I had ever seen. Survival instinct is a terrifying thing. In the face of absolute financial and social annihilation, my father fell back on the only skill he had ever truly mastered: deception. Family, friends, and distinguished guests. Marcus began, his deep, booming baritone echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. The slight tremor in his voice was easily disguised as paternal emotion. "Thank you all for gathering here tonight in this magnificent space. We are here to celebrate love, to celebrate unity, and to celebrate the joining of 2 incredible dynasties." The crowd responded with warm, enthusiastic applause. I saw a local Atlanta senator nod approvingly from the front row. Several high society women from my mother's exclusive social clubs dabbed at their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. They were buying every single word. Marcus leaned into the microphone, his confidence artificially inflating as the audience validated his performance. "When I look around this room tonight, I am overwhelmed by the sheer power of legacy," he continued, projecting his voice with practiced theatrical sincerity. "Building a family is very much like building an empire. It requires sacrifice. It requires unyielding dedication, and most importantly, it requires a commitment to excellence. As a proud Black man who has spent his life building wealth and opportunity in this great city of Atlanta, I know that true success is not measured by the balances in our bank accounts. It is measured by the children we raise to carry our name forward. I lowered my champagne flute to the table. The absolute staggering hypocrisy of his words was almost a physical weight in the room. He was standing in front of 300 people preaching about sacrifice and excellence just 30 minutes after he had tried to smash my skull open with a brass centerpiece to steal my property. He was talking about building wealth while hiding a $2 million fraudulent offshore debt that was about to send him to federal prison. I shifted my gaze to the far end of the VIP table. Vivian was sitting rigidly in her chair. She was not clapping. She was not smiling. She was clutching her cloth napkin so tightly her fingers were trembling. She kept darting terrified glances between the stage and my table. She knew exactly what I knew. She knew the guillotine blade was already falling and her husband was standing on the stage adjusting his tie right beneath it. Chloe was still missing, presumably locked inside a bathroom stall, having a total psychological breakdown over her rented defaced wedding gown. And speaking of the future, Marcus boomed, extending his hand gracefully toward the crowd. Let us talk about my beautiful, perfect daughter, Chloe. The guests let out a collective, affectionate murmur. From the day she was born, Chloe has been the light of our household. My father lied flawlessly, his smile widening into a mask of pure manufactured devotion. She has always understood the weight of our family name. She has always carried herself with grace, elegance, and an unwavering commitment to the values her mother and I instilled in her. We raised her to understand that family protects family no matter what. She is everything a father could ever ask for, and watching her step into this new chapter fills my heart with a pride I cannot even begin to describe. I felt a cold, sharp laugh rise in the back of my throat, but I kept my face entirely impassive. He was praising the same daughter who had just thrown a hysterical tantrum over the aesthetic of her reception, while I lay bleeding on a hotel floor. He was celebrating a woman who had planned to use her own marriage as a financial bailout scheme to cover his wire fraud. The sheer delusion required to deliver that speech was breathtaking. Marcus then turned his body, slightly directing his full attention toward the tables where the Boston contingent sat. Harrison's family, the epitome of old money restraint, watched him with polite, unreadable expressions. To Harrison and to the entire esteemed family who traveled all the way from Massachusetts to be with us tonight, Marcus said, lowering his voice into a tone of deep, respectful reverence, we welcome you to Atlanta with open arms. When Chloe first introduced us to Harrison, I knew immediately that he was a man of profound integrity. I saw a man who understands the responsibility of wealth and the importance of legacy. The audacity was staggering. I watched my father look directly into the eyes of the billionaire patriarch, whose trust fund he had secretly leveraged for a fraudulent bridge loan. He was smiling at the very people he had robbed blind. Harrison, my father continued, placing a hand over his heart. You are not just gaining a beautiful wife today. You are gaining a family that will stand behind you, support you, and protect you fiercely. You are a son to me now, and in our family we share everything. We build our futures together. We trust each other implicitly. I picked up my crystal flute and took another slow sip of champagne. The bitter irony of his words tasted incredibly sweet. He was digging his own grave deeper and wider with every single syllable that left his mouth. He thought he was charming the room, but he was actually just providing the perfect dramatic setup for the absolute devastation that was about to follow. I want to raise a glass to the happy couple, Marcus announced, grabbing a pre-poured glass of champagne from the podium. He held it high above his head. The 300 guests immediately stood up from their chairs, their glittering dresses and tailored suits rustling in unison. They raised their crystal glasses toward the ceiling. To Chloe and Harrison, Marcus declared, his voice echoing triumphantly, may your foundation be built on absolute truth, may your wealth multiply across generations, and may your legacy be one of unbreakable family loyalty. Cheers! Cheers! The massive crowd echoed back. The sound of hundreds of crystal glasses clinking together filled the grand ballroom like a wave of shattering glass. I remained seated. I did not raise my glass. I simply watched my father drink his champagne, savoring the last few seconds of his manufactured supremacy. Marcus lowered his glass, wiping a fresh bead of sweat from his upper lip. He looked out over the applauding crowd, a brief, fleeting look of relief washing over his face. He actually thought he had pulled it off. He thought his charismatic performance had bought him enough time to figure a way out of the impossible trap I had set for him. "But I have spoken enough for one evening," Marcus said, wrapping up his speech with a polished, rehearsed chuckle. "It is time to hear from the man of the hour. Please join me in welcoming my new son, a man of exceptional character and brilliant judgment, our groom, Harrison." The ballroom erupted into deafening applause. The orchestra played a brief, celebratory fanfare. Marcus stepped away from the microphone, clapping loudly, his chest puffed out with false pride. I set my champagne glass down on the white silk tablecloth. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my folded hands, and locked my eyes on the stage. The overture was finished. The main event was finally here. I watched as Harrison stood up from his table, adjusted the cuffs of his immaculate tuxedo, and began walking toward the stage with the cold, calculated precision of an executioner. Harrison stepped onto the stage, his movements fluid and entirely unbothered. He did not look like a man blinded by love or desperate for acceptance into Southern high society. He looked like a board member arriving to terminate a rogue chief executive officer. Marcus extended a trembling, sweaty hand toward him. Harrison took it, offering a firm, polite shake that lasted exactly 1 second too long. I could see my father exhale a shaky breath of relief as he relinquished the microphone and hurried down the stairs to take his seat next to my mother. The applause gradually died down as Harrison adjusted the microphone stand to his height. He looked out over the sea of expectant faces, his expression perfectly composed. "Thank you, Marcus, for those incredibly generous words," Harrison began, his crisp Boston accent cutting through the warm acoustics of the ballroom. "And thank you to everyone who traveled from near and far to be here tonight. This is certainly an evening that none of us will ever forget." The audience chuckled politely. My mother, sitting at the far end of the VIP table, managed a strained, fragile smile. She was gripping her water glass so tightly I expected the crystal to shatter in her hand. Marcus spoke eloquently about legacy. Harrison continued, his voice smooth and conversational. He spoke about trust, family loyalty, and the responsibilities that come with building an empire. In my family, we share those exact same values. My parents, who are sitting right over there, taught me from a very young age that wealth is not simply about what you accumulate. It is about what you protect. And when you come from a family that has spent generations protecting its assets, you learn very quickly that trust is not something you give away freely. Trust is something that must be verified. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The polite, adoring smiles on the faces of my mother's socialite friends began to falter. The transition in Harrison's tone was masterful. He had not raised his voice, but the sudden razor-sharp edge to his words sliced through the celebratory atmosphere like a scythe. The wealthy guests from Boston sat perfectly still, their expressions unreadable, recognizing the distinct icy tone of old money preparing to go to war. Harrison turned his head and looked directly at the production booth situated at the back of the ballroom. He gave a sharp, subtle nod to the audio-visual technicians. The ambient golden lighting of the chandeliers immediately dimmed, casting the room into dramatic shadow. A low mechanical hum vibrated through the room as a massive 20-foot-high projection screen slowly descended from the ceiling, dropping directly behind the stage where Harrison stood. A collective murmur of confusion rippled through the guests. A slide presentation during a wedding toast was unusual, but not entirely unheard of. Most people probably expected a sentimental photo montage of the bride and groom, but I knew exactly what was about to illuminate that pristine white canvas. Marcus bolted upright in his chair. He looked at the descending screen as if it were a dropping guillotine blade. Vivian reached out and grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with mounting panic. She looked frantically around the room, searching for an elegant way to stop whatever was happening, but they were entirely trapped by the hundreds of eyes fixed upon the stage. When Chloe and I became engaged, Harrison said, pacing slowly across the stage, the spotlight tracking his deliberate movements. I realized I was marrying into a family that presented a flawless image to the world. Marcus and Vivian are known throughout Atlanta for their pristine reputation, their philanthropic endeavors, and their supposed financial acumen. But an image is a very easy thing to construct. Reality is much harder to maintain. Harrison stopped pacing. He looked directly at Marcus. 3 months ago, I noticed a few minor discrepancies. A strange signature on a routine background check. An inquiry from a commercial lender that made absolutely no sense given the supposed liquidity of my future father-in-law's banking portfolio. Most men blinded by wedding planning might have ignored it, but as Marcus just reminded us, I understand the responsibility of wealth. I protect my family's legacy. The ballroom was now dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick patterned carpet. The guests were holding their breath, paralyzed by the sudden horrifying realization that they were not witnessing a wedding toast. They were witnessing a corporate execution broadcast live in formal wear. The local politicians in the front rows began shifting uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly hyper-aware of their association with my father. I did not just hire a standard team of forensic accountants to look into these anomalies. Harrison announced, his voice ringing with absolute crushing authority. Accountants only look at the numbers. I needed someone who understood the psychology of deception. I needed someone who knew how to dismantle a fraudulent empire from the inside out. So I bypassed the Boston firms entirely. I hired the most ruthless, effective crisis management and corporate audit firm in the Southeast. Harrison raised his hand and pointed directly across the ballroom. He did not point to the back doors. He did not point to the ceiling. He pointed his index finger straight at the elevated VIP platform. He pointed directly at me. I hired her, Harrison stated. 300 pairs of eyes snapped toward my table simultaneously. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. They saw me sitting there, flanked by my massive, unmoving hotel security detail. They saw the flesh-colored bandage stark against my temple, a glaring symbol of the violence that had occurred just before the reception. I rested my chin on my folded hands, offering the crowd a cold, triumphant smile. I hired Maya Harrison, clarified, ensuring every single person in the room knew my name and understood my power. The chief executive officer of the crisis public relations firm that holds the keys to half the corporate reputations in this city. A woman who conveniently enough possesses an intimate insider knowledge of exactly how the bride's family operates behind closed doors. Vivian let out a strangled, breathless gasp. She clutched her chest, her face turning a sickly ashen gray. She shrank back into her chair as if she had been physically struck by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. Marcus looked like his brain had completely short-circuited. His jaw hung slack, his eyes darting frantically between Harrison on the stage and me at the VIP table. The realization hit him with the catastrophic force of a freight train. This was not a sudden, spontaneous act of rebellion triggered in the bridal suite. I had not just figured out his crimes today. Harrison and I had been working together for 3 entire months. We had been quietly, methodically digging into his offshore accounts, mapping out his fraudulent loans, tracking his desperate communications, and building an ironclad federal case against him. We had done all of this while he was busy picking out imported white orchids, boasting at his country club, and lecturing me about being a pathetic failure. He had invited his executioner into his home and asked him to marry his favorite daughter. Maya and her team have spent the last 90 days conducting a comprehensive microscopic audit of Marcus's entire financial history. Harrison continued, ensuring the blade was buried as deeply as possible into my father's shattered ego. She warned me that what we found would not be pretty. But even she underestimated the sheer scale of the deception, the greed, and the absolute criminal desperation we were about to uncover. I raised my champagne flute toward Harrison in a silent, mocking toast. He offered a tight, acknowledging nod in return. We had played them flawlessly. My parents had been so blinded by their own arrogance, so obsessed with their superficial social climbing, that they had invited their own destruction right through the front door and paid $150,000 to give the man holding the match a microphone. The heavy double mahogany doors leading into the Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom stood open, and the silence inside the room was so profound it felt like a vacuum. Every single eye was glued to the massive projection screen. Harrison raised a small black remote in his right hand and pressed a single button. The screen flickered, bathing the stage in a harsh, clinical white light. A series of highly classified financial documents materialized on the screen, magnified so large that every guest in the back row could read the fine print. These are the internal ledgers for 3 offshore shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Harrison announced, his voice echoing with surgical precision. If you look closely at the routing numbers, you will see they lead directly back to Marcus and his local banking branches here in Atlanta. But the most interesting part is not the location of the accounts. It is the name on the primary guarantor forms. Harrison clicked the remote again. The screen zoomed in on a specific paragraph at the bottom of a loan agreement. A collective, horrified gasp sucked the air right out of the grand ballroom. There, blown up to 10 times its normal size, was Harrison's full legal name, accompanied by a signature that looked remarkably authentic. Marcus forged my signature to secure a $2 million line of credit, Harrison stated, letting the catastrophic reality of that sentence settle over the crowd. He used my family's generational trust fund as collateral to save his own sinking ship. He banked on the fact that once I was legally married to his daughter, my family would quietly pay off the debt to avoid a public scandal. He thought old money meant quiet money. He was violently incorrect. The reaction from this crowd was instantaneous and devastating. The prominent Atlanta politicians and bank executives sitting in the front rows physically recoiled. Several men immediately pulled out their phones, likely messaging their own legal teams to sever any ties with my father. The Boston contingent sat in absolute frozen silence, their faces masks of pure aristocratic fury. Marcus was completely paralyzed. He stood near the VIP table, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly, a man watching his entire life evaporate into thin air. Before Marcus could even attempt to defend himself, a shrill, piercing scream shattered the tension in the room. "Harrison, stop it right now." Everyone turned toward the side entrance. Chloe burst through the doors, her rented Vera Wang gown dragging heavily across the floor. Her flawless bridal makeup was completely ruined, streaked with dark lines of mascara from her earlier breakdown in the bridal suite. She looked nothing like a blushing bride. She looked like a cornered, desperate animal. She scrambled up the steps to the stage, grabbing the edge of the acrylic podium. Her hands were shaking violently. "Harrison, you have to stop," she pleaded, her voice cracking into a pathetic, breathy sob. "I did not know anything about this. I swear to you, I had no idea what my father was doing. You cannot blame me for his mistakes. We love each other. We are supposed to be starting our lives together. Please do not let him ruin our perfect day." Harrison did not flinch. He did not step away from her, nor did he reach out to comfort her. He simply looked down at the woman he was supposed to marry with an expression of absolute chilling indifference. "It is truly remarkable," Harrison said softly, though the microphone carried his voice to every corner of the room. "You stand there wearing a rented floor sample that your sister had to pay off to keep you from being arrested, and you still try to play the innocent victim. Maya warned me that you were a master of manipulation, Chloe. I just never realized how little respect you actually had for my intelligence." Chloe staggered back as if she had been slapped. The mention of the rented dress was a direct, lethal strike to her carefully curated high society image. Her eyes darted frantically toward the Boston tables, watching Harrison's incredibly wealthy mother slowly shake her head in absolute disgust. "I am not a victim of my father," Chloe cried out, her voice growing shrill and desperate. "I am a victim of Maya. She is doing this to destroy me. She hates me because I am beautiful and successful. She poisoned you against me." Harrison let out a short, humorless laugh. He raised the remote control again. "Maya did not poison me against you, Chloe. You did that entirely on your own. I just needed Maya's firm to recover the digital footprints you were too arrogant to erase." He pressed the button. The massive projection screen shifted instantly. The forged financial documents vanished, replaced by a series of high-resolution photographs and text message screenshots. The ballroom erupted into sheer, unadulterated chaos. The photographs on the screen were crystal clear. They showed Chloe sitting in the dimly lit corner of an upscale lounge, intimately entwined with a man who was decidedly not Harrison. The man had his hands resting firmly on her waist, and she was leaning in, kissing him passionately. For those of you who do not recognize the gentleman on the screen, Harrison announced, his voice slicing through the frantic murmurs of the crowd, that is Julian. He is a personal trainer from Buckhead, and more importantly, he is Chloe's long-term ex-boyfriend. A boyfriend she supposedly broke up with 2 years ago. Chloe let out a horrified, guttural shriek. She threw her hands over her face, turning her back to the massive screen, but there was nowhere to hide. The evidence was 50 feet wide and glowing in high definition. Harrison clicked the remote again. The photographs shrank to the side, making room for a massive display of text messages. The names, dates, and timestamps were perfectly visible. "Let us read a few of these together," Harrison suggested, his tone dripping with lethal sarcasm. "This particular exchange took place 3 weeks ago, right after I purchased our honeymoon tickets to the Maldives. Chloe texts, 'I cannot stand him touching me, but the Boston ATM just cleared the honeymoon. Once the ring is on my finger, I will make sure his family pays off my dad's debt. Then you and I can finally buy that condo in Miami.'" Vivian let out a loud, dramatic wail from the VIP table and literally collapsed out of her chair. She crumpled onto the hotel carpet in a heap of expensive silk, pretending to faint to escape the suffocating humiliation. Marcus did not even move to help her. He was staring at the text messages on the screen, realizing that his own daughter had openly documented their conspiracy to commit massive financial fraud. "Here is another one." Harrison continued, relentlessly clicking the remote one more time. "The timestamp on this message is from last night, exactly 12 hours ago. Chloe texts, 'I am leaving the rehearsal dinner now. Keep the back door to your apartment unlocked. This is the last time I have to sleep with him before I secure the bag.'" The guests were completely paralyzed. No one dared to take a breath. The sheer, calculated depravity of Chloe's actions was laid bare for the entire world to see. She had not been pressured by her father. She had not been a clueless bystander. She was the active, willing architect of the entire plot. She was trading her own marriage to bail out her father's criminal debts, fully intending to use Harrison's family wealth to fund a secret life with her lover. Harrison turned to look at Chloe, who was now weeping hysterically on the stage, her rented dress pooling around her in a pathetic, wrinkled mess. "You did not want a marriage," Harrison stated, his voice ringing with crushing finality. "You wanted a hostage. You thought you could use my name, my money, and my family to buy your way out of the pathetic, fraudulent hole your father dug for you. You thought I was just a naive, deep-pocketed prop for your social media aesthetic. But you made one fatal miscalculation. You forgot that real power does not need to announce itself. It just waits for you to make a mistake." Harrison turned his back on Chloe's crumpled form and addressed the stunned ballroom once more. His voice lost the sharp, theatrical edge, settling into a cold, devastating calm. "When Maya and I first uncovered the extent of this conspiracy," Harrison said, "we knew simply canceling the wedding wouldn't be enough. Men like Marcus, families like this, they thrive in the shadows. They spin narratives, play the victim, and quietly move on to their next target. To stop them, we had to expose them completely, publicly, and undeniably. We needed absolute, incontrovertible proof, not just of the financial fraud, but of their profound moral bankruptcy." He gestured toward where I sat at the VIP table, still flanked by my impromptu security detail. "Maya's presence here tonight, specifically in the bridal suite just before the ceremony, was the final stress test," Harrison revealed. "We needed to see exactly how far Marcus would go to protect his fraudulent empire when cornered. We knew he was desperate, but even we didn't anticipate the sheer unhinged violence he was capable of." A low murmur rippled through the guests. The realization of what Harrison was implying, that the bandage on my head was not the result of a clumsy fall, but a deliberate assault, sent a fresh wave of horror through the crowd. Before Maya entered that suite, Harrison continued, his gaze locking onto Marcus, who had gone completely rigid. She initiated an encrypted audio recording on her phone. The device was discreetly positioned in her clutch purse. Every single threat, every demand for her property, and the sickening sound of that brass centerpiece striking her skull, it was all captured in high-definition audio. Marcus let out a strangled animalistic sound. He lunged forward instinctively, but the two massive hotel security guards behind me immediately closed ranks, their hands dropping to their utility belts. Marcus froze, the reality of his total powerlessness finally breaking him. Maya handed that phone off to my head of security the moment she stepped out of the suite, Harrison stated, delivering the final fatal blow. The audio file was immediately uploaded to a secure cloud server and transmitted directly to the Atlanta Police Department, along with the complete dossier of forensic financial evidence my team compiled. Harrison looked down at his left hand. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled the heavy gold wedding band from his ring finger. The metal flashed under the stage lights for a brief second before he dropped it. The ring hit the wooden stage with a sharp final clink, rolling a few inches before coming to a stop near Chloe's trembling knees. "There will be no wedding today," Harrison announced, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "There is no bailout. There is no legacy. There is only the absolute, undeniable truth of what this family really is." He let the microphone drop from his hand. It hit the podium with a loud electronic squeal that made several guests wince. Without another word, Harrison turned and walked down the steps of the stage, bypassing the VIP table entirely, and headed straight toward his family's section. As if orchestrated by an unseen director, the heavy mahogany doors at the main entrance of the ballroom swung open. 4 uniformed Atlanta police officers strode into the room, their expressions grim and purposeful. 2 detectives in sharp suits followed closely behind them, holding thick manila folders. The guests parted instantly, creating a wide, terrified path for the authorities. The officers marched directly toward the VIP platform. "Marcus Sterling," the lead detective barked, his voice cutting through the lingering tension. "You are under arrest for aggravated assault, wire fraud, and identity theft. Put your hands behind your back." Marcus didn't run. He didn't protest. He simply stood there, a broken, defeated man, as the officers secured the steel handcuffs tightly around his wrists. The click of the locking mechanism echoed loudly in the silent room. The sound of the metal teeth catching on the handcuffs seemed to break the spell that had frozen the room. Suddenly, the grand ballroom exploded into a cacophony of gasps, panicked whispers, and the unmistakable rapid clicking of smartphone camera shutters. Dozens of guests, the very people my parents had bankrupted themselves to impress, now had their devices raised high in the air. They were capturing every agonizing second of the great Marcus Sterling being marched out of the Ritz-Carlton in police custody. His custom tuxedo suddenly looked less like a symbol of power and more like a costume he had no right to wear. He kept his head bowed, his eyes fixed firmly on the floral-patterned carpet as 2 officers escorted him down the main aisle. He did not look at my mother. He did not look at Chloe, and he certainly did not look back at me. Vivian, who was still sprawled on the floor in her expensive silk dress, let out a hollow, shattered wail as she watched her husband and her entire social standing disappear through the double mahogany doors. The local politicians and bank board members who had been drinking our champagne just moments ago were now actively turning their backs, frantically distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout. The Boston contingent had already begun quietly and efficiently gathering their belongings, moving with the practiced swiftness of old money, completely erasing a bad investment. Then a sound like tearing fabric ripped through the chaos. Chloe scrambled up from the stage, her rented Vera Wang gown catching on the heel of her shoe and tearing a massive jagged hole through the French lace. She did not even notice the destruction of the dress she had prized so highly just an hour ago. Her face was a horrific portrait of smeared mascara and pure, unadulterated panic. She threw herself down the steps of the VIP platform and lunged toward my table, her hands grasping wildly at the air. Sterling and my security detail immediately shifted forward, their massive frames forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and dark suits. Chloe crashed into them, screaming and thrashing against their solid chests. "You ruined my life!" She shrieked, her voice tearing at the seams. She beat her fists against the chest of the nearest security guard, her eyes locked onto me with a mixture of absolute hatred and profound disbelief. You took everything from me, Maya. I was supposed to be a billionaire. I was supposed to have the Hamptons house and the trust funds. You plotted this. You set me up just because you are a bitter, jealous monster. You ruined my fairy tale. Her legs finally gave out. She collapsed onto the hotel floor, a heap of ruined tulle and shattered dreams, weeping so violently her entire body convulsed. She clawed at the carpet, screaming that I had destroyed her future, that I had intentionally sabotaged the only good thing she had ever built. I did not flinch. I did not stand up to comfort her, nor did I raise my voice to shout over her hysterics. I simply looked down at my younger sister from my elevated seat, feeling the absolute serene weight of a justice long overdue. I did not ruin your life, Chloe, I replied. My voice was quiet, but it carried a razor-sharp clarity that cut straight through her sobbing. I did not make you sleep with your ex-boyfriend. I did not force you to write those text messages bragging about using Harrison as an ATM. And I certainly did not force our father to commit federal wire fraud and smash a brass candle holder into my skull. Chloe gasped for air, shaking her head frantically in denial. But you exposed it, she wailed. You could have just signed the deed and kept your mouth shut. We could have all been happy. You would have been happy, I corrected her, my tone dropping to a freezing absolute zero. You would have been happy living a lie funded by stolen money and built on top of my ruined business. You wanted a fairy tale, Chloe, but you demanded that I pay for the castle and bleed for the entertainment. I leaned forward slightly, making sure she could see the absolute finality in my eyes. You built your own cage. You handed Harrison the lock and you gave me the key. The only thing I did today was refuse to open the door. You ruined your own life, Chloe. Now you have to sit in the ashes and choke on the smoke. She stared up at me, her mouth hanging open, the final realization of her total defeat crashing down upon her. There was no one left to manipulate. Her wealthy groom was gone. Her criminal father was in a squad car. Her enabler mother was weeping on the floor. And the sister she had bullied for a lifetime was now the undisputed architect of her destruction. Chloe backed away, her hands clutching the rented silk of her gown, as if it might turn to dust. She stumbled down the 2 shallow steps of the VIP platform, her eyes darting frantically toward Harrison's table to ensure no one had witnessed her total collapse. She practically sprinted toward the powder room, leaving a trail of shattered illusions behind her. Before I could even set my glass down, a heavy, suffocating presence loomed over my table. Marcus had been watching the exchange from the far end of the platform. Seeing his golden child reduced to a trembling mess had pushed him past the brink of rational thought. He marched toward me, his heavy leather shoes striking the floorboards with loud, aggressive thuds. My security detail instantly tightened their formation. Sterling took a half step forward, placing his massive frame directly in my father's path. Marcus stopped, his chest heaving, his face a mottled, dangerous shade of crimson. He could not touch me, but the sheer volume of his hatred radiated across the white silk tablecloth. "You think you have won?" Marcus growled. His voice was a low, venomous vibration, carefully pitched to avoid echoing across the ballroom but packed with enough malice to freeze blood. "You think a few hotel security guards and a fancy public relations title make you untouchable? You are nothing, Maya. You are exactly the same pathetic, arrogant girl I kicked out of my house 10 years ago." I did not break eye contact. I rested my hands in my lap, projecting absolute stillness. "I built this family." Marcus continued, leaning forward as far as the guards would allow. "I built an empire in this city while you were busy playing victim. I have senators on speed dial. I have judges who play golf at my country club. Do you honestly believe I cannot crush a boutique media agency with one phone call? I will make it my personal mission to see you ruined. I will bankrupt you. I will freeze your assets. I will drag your name through so much dirt that you will not be able to get a job pouring coffee in Atlanta." He was panting now, the exertion of his own rage taking a physical toll. The confident, wealthy patriarch was completely gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal thrashing wildly against the bars of a cage he had built himself. "I will burn you to the ground, Maya," he spat. I will take everything you have. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the scent of the expensive white orchids fill my lungs. The orchestra was playing a lively waltz in the background, a sharp contrast to the absolute destruction happening at the head table. I looked at the man who had terrorized me for my entire childhood. I looked at the hands that had swung a brass centerpiece at my skull just an hour ago. I felt absolutely no fear. Are you going to ruin me before or after Harrison finds out about the $2 million offshore debt you tied to his name? I asked. The words hung in the air, sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Marcus stopped breathing. He literally stopped drawing air into his lungs. The angry, mottled red color vanished from his cheeks in a single heartbeat, leaving his face a horrifying, translucent shade of gray. His eyes widened so far I could see the whites all the way around his irises. I did not raise my voice. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, and delivered the details with ruthless mechanical accuracy. You thought you were so clever, Dad. You thought nobody would ever audit the shell companies you set up in the Cayman Islands. But when Harrison's family required a routine background check before the wedding, your messy financial trails started flashing bright red. You were drowning in bad commercial real estate loans, so you forged Harrison's signature. You used his social security number and his family's legacy trust as collateral to secure a $2 million bridge loan to keep your own creditors from seizing your Alpharetta mansion. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His jaw worked silently like a fish pulled out of the water. He gripped the edge of the table to keep his knees from buckling. That is wire fraud. I continued, my voice a quiet, rhythmic drumbeat of doom. That is identity theft. That is federal bank fraud. You are not just looking at bankruptcy, Dad. You are looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary. You crossed the wrong family. Harrison's father sits on the board of the bank you defrauded. You actually thought you could steal from Boston old money to fund a fake Southern dynasty and get away with it. It was a loan. Marcus finally choked out his voice, a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze. It was just a temporary bridge loan. I was going to pay it back after the wedding. Once Harrison and Chloe were married, the family funds would have covered it. I was protecting us. You were protecting yourself, I corrected him coldly. You gambled away your fortune, and you tried to use your daughters as poker chips to buy it back. You tried to steal my house to cover your immediate interest payments, and you tried to use Chloe's marriage to steal millions from her husband. You are a parasite. I watched the absolute reality of his situation crash down upon him. He was not a respected banker anymore. He was a criminal standing in a room full of people he had lied to, waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. The sweat on his forehead beaded and rolled down his temples, soaking into the stiff collar of his custom tuxedo. Maya, please, Marcus whispered. The threat was completely gone, replaced by a sickening, desperate begging. You cannot tell them. If Harrison finds out, he will call the authorities. His family will destroy me. I will go to prison. Please, I am your father. We can fix this. You have the money. You can cover the loan. You can buy the debt. We can make this go away. I stared at him, feeling a profound, absolute emptiness where my familial loyalty used to be. I am not covering anything I stated, and I do not need to tell Harrison. Before Marcus could process the meaning of my words, a sharp, crystalline sound cut through the heavy tension. It was the distinct ringing chime of a silver spoon tapping against a crystal champagne flute. The orchestra immediately ceased playing. The lively chatter of the 150 high society guests faded into an expectant, polite silence. The master of ceremonies, a man in a pristine white suit, stepped up to the microphone positioned near the towering ice sculpture. Ladies and gentlemen, the master of ceremonies announced, his voice booming across the grand ballroom. If I could please have your attention, it is time for the formal toasts. We would like to welcome the father of the bride to the stage to say a few words about his beautiful daughter and to welcome our distinguished groom into the family. The guests erupted into polite, enthusiastic applause, faces turned toward our table beaming with expectation. I looked up at Marcus. His entire body was trembling. He looked like a man being asked to walk to the gallows. That is your cue, Dad, I said, offering him a sharp, merciless smile. Wipe the sweat off your face. You have a room full of billionaires waiting to hear you talk about family values. Do not keep them waiting. Marcus stared at me for one last terrifying second, his eyes filled with the absolute certainty of his own destruction. Then, propelled purely by the mechanical instinct of a man desperate to maintain his facade for a few more minutes, he turned and began his slow, agonizing walk toward the stage. I did not stay to watch the hotel staff clean up the mess. I turned my back on the wreckage of my family, stepped out the front doors of the Ritz-Carlton, and ignored the flashing lights of the arriving police cruisers. I inhaled the warm, humid Atlanta night air. It was the first time in 32 years that I could breathe without the suffocating weight of my family's expectations crushing my lungs. Now, exactly 1 year later, I am sitting in the exact place they tried to steal from me. I lean back against the plush velvet cushions of my living room sofa and take a slow, calming sip of my Earl Grey tea. The late afternoon sun streams through the custom-arched windows of my Buckhead home. It casts a warm golden glow across the meticulously restored mahogany floors and the bespoke fixtures I chose with my own 2 hands. The house is perfectly beautifully quiet. It is a fortress built entirely on my own merit, and its walls are impenetrable. The silence I enjoy every single day is a luxury my father will not experience for a very long time. Marcus did not manage to charm his way out of his federal indictments. Harrison's family unleashed a terrifying army of corporate litigators to ensure every single fraudulent transaction was prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The financial audit my team provided was completely bulletproof, leaving his defense attorneys with absolutely zero leverage. Marcus ultimately pleaded guilty to wire fraud, identity theft, and aggravated assault to avoid a highly publicized, embarrassing trial. He was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. The bank immediately seized the sprawling Alpharetta mansion to recover their massive losses. He was left with absolutely nothing to his name except an inmate number and a standard-issue jumpsuit. My mother's descent was less legal, but arguably more agonizing for a woman whose entire identity was tethered to her perceived social supremacy. The elite circles of Atlanta operate with ruthless surgical efficiency when excising a scandal. Vivian was immediately expelled from her prestigious Jack and Jill chapter. Her exclusive country club memberships were permanently revoked. The wealthy women she had spent decades trying to impress now look right through her if they happen to cross paths at the local grocery store. Stripped of her husband's stolen wealth and her social armor, she was forced to move into a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. She tried calling me twice from a blocked number to beg for financial assistance to save her social standing. I did not say a single word. I simply hung up the phone and upgraded my security protocols. She now spends her days entirely alone, isolated from the high society world she valued far more than the safety of her own daughter. As for Chloe, her meticulously curated fairy tale ended exactly as I predicted. The moment the billionaire ATM was officially closed, her personal trainer boyfriend vanished without a trace, entirely unwilling to stick around for the poverty phase of their relationship. Without Harrison's family to bail her out, her mountain of secret credit card debt finally collapsed on top of her. She was sued by the bridal boutique for the irreparable damage to the rented Vera Wang gown, forcing her into an immediate, humiliating bankruptcy. She no longer spends her summers in the Hamptons or her winters in Aspen. Instead, she works 40 hours a week at a mid-level retail store in a suburban mall. She is forced to fold clothes and actually earn her living for the first time in her 28 years. She deleted all of her social media accounts, completely erased from the glamorous digital world she used to dominate. And then there is me. I am still here, thriving. The brass strike to my temple healed into a faint, thin, silver scar just below my hairline, a permanent physical reminder of the price of my absolute freedom. I wear it like a badge of honor. My crisis public relations firm did not suffer from the exposure of the scandal. In fact, our annual revenue tripled. As it turns out, powerful corporate executives and billionaires are incredibly eager to hire a crisis manager who can execute a flawless surgical takedown of her own corrupt bloodline without breaking a single sweat. Harrison even sent a vintage bottle of champagne to my office last month, with a brief note thanking me for my flawless execution. I placed my teacup softly onto the marble coffee table. I do not feel any guilt. I do not feel any lingering resentment, regret, or anger. I simply feel an overwhelming, profound sense of peace. Family is not a slaughterhouse where you drain my blood to paint your face. We are finally permanently done. I saved myself, and I built an untouchable empire on the ashes of their entitlement. The sunlight fades slightly, bathing my living room in a rich, comforting twilight. I close my eyes, surrounded by the absolute safety of my own sanctuary, completely untouched and undeniably victorious.